The closure of St Andrew's ward will disproportionately affect young and marginalised people. It takes away services from the people that need it most. Young people are already disproportionately affected by mental health problems.
The issue with St Andrew's ward is that the Somerset Clinical Commissioning Group, the CCG, made the decision to close the ward and reopen one of the wards at Yeovil instead. What we're calling for now is for the CCG to delay on the closure of the ward so that they can take into account the effects of the pandemic. I mean, obviously at the moment a lot of people are going to be bereaved because of COVID, and clearly that's going to cause people to become unhappy, and that can lead to depression, anxiety and stress. People are obviously having financial difficulties, people struggling perhaps in relationships or dealing with unemployment and things like that are obviously major stressors that can cause people to have a mental health issue.
For most young people, this pandemic is the hardest time they have ever experienced in terms of their mental health. This closure will snatch the rug from under their feet at the worst possible time.
Generally, I think there isn't just a COVID-19 pandemic in the United Kingdom. I think there's a mental health pandemic. So in a situation where we are now, the last thing you want to do is to make friends and family travel long distances to visit people who've been sectioned or people who are in residential mental health care. That's also very stressful for people who are suffering from mental ill health themselves.
If you've got a physical health condition like you've broken your leg, then you need to get treatment for that. But that's no different from if you've got a broken mind, because you need to get help for that too, because both of them can affect you in such a bad way that you could end up dead as a result of it. With a mental health ward, obviously that's not the same, because clearly you need family and friends to visit you as a vital part of your recovery time. If people are sent to Yeovil instead of to Wells, then that interaction with friends and family is going to be severely reduced. People won't be able to visit as often because they won't be able to get there, and it will take them longer to get there, so they'll be there for less time. They'll be able to visit less frequently.
What about the mentally ill themselves? Mentally ill people aren't people of lesser intelligence. They're not entitled to less consideration. What about mentally ill people having a firm, full say in where they're treated and how they're treated? So it is largely a question of going away from an old authoritarian system of people being treated as if they have a physical illness of which they know nothing about. Most mentally ill people are fully aware of their plight, but they have rights, and they should have more rights, and they should have the chance to have a real say in where they're treated. And obviously, that would be in the nearest publicly organised mental health clinic, mental health ward, such as St Andrew's wards.
So if somebody is suffering, they may not admit to it, and that can, of course, make it worse. So it's quite important that people look out for each other and try and notice if somebody who is usually outgoing and communicative suddenly sort of shuts down, or if they...
Many mental health issues go undiagnosed and untreated.
We need to talk about these issues and recognise that mental health services, such as St Andrew's ward, are here for us all. Only 2 weeks ago, here in Wales, a 50-year-old man killed himself. In the first 6 months of the pandemic, more people died of suicide than of COVID in the Mendip area.
Is that all local areas should understand the mental health needs of residents in order to plan appropriate levels of services. So mental health services need to be aligned to those in the community.
And the line between being okay and not being okay is very thin. It only takes a split second to walk into traffic or jump off a bridge. Any of us could be that person.
The idea of trying to shock the public through the representation of death Sometimes that's a coffin that's carried through the streets. In this case, it was people dying on the ground in beds. Is just an established way of trying to raise public opinion all over the world in terms of increased suicides and increased deaths of due to severe mental illness, due directly or indirectly to a lack of real care when it's needed and where it's needed.
Suicide is the leading cause of death in young adults. Over 1 in 4 deaths in young men are as a result of suicide, and over 1 in 6 deaths in young women. Sadly, 70% of people who experience a mental health problem do not get the appropriate care at a sufficiently young age, which exacerbates existing problems.
But when the individual is so unwell that they need hospitalisation, the professional and the informal network around the individual and their family needs to be closely linked to the hospital team. And this cannot happen as it should when the team is 30 miles away.
And in terms of mentally ill people themselves, what makes it more difficult to survive as a mentally ill person if you cannot be visited by your friends, if you cannot be visited by your ex-work colleagues, and how difficult it is to get from Wells to Yeovil?
What we're also suffering from is that actually in practice, we don't have a truly national health service in this country, and that includes mental health. We have many NHS trusts, which are highly managed, some would say over-managed. They have their own protective boundaries. And this has led to the ridiculous situation where just over the district council border from Wells in Bath, mentally ill people are being sent up and down the country, sometimes hundreds of miles for treatment because of a loss of beds. How central the city of Wells is to the whole of Somerset. You see why in the mid-19th century, one of Somerset's largest mental hospitals, as they were called then, mental asylums, literally asylum, a refuge from the cares of the world, was opened at Wells. And I mean, that was only finally shut 20 odd years ago. So that was chosen for a purpose because Wells is in the geographical centre of a very large county. Yeovil, in contrast, is on the very extreme southeast edge of Somerset.
One of the things that all of these clinical commissioning groups seem to want to do is to concentrate services into small areas. So they seem to have a plan where they want to concentrate everything either in Yeovil or in Taunton, which is not helpful in an area the size of Somerset, which has very poor transport links.
There is quite a sinister aspect to the way that the clinical commissioning group, on behalf of the NHS Trust, have actually run this closure campaign, because they're basically saying that although a majority of people in their own consultation were against the closure, wanted St Andrew's Ward to stay, they said, well, they wouldn't they, because they're local. So it's not just that there's absolutely no point in consulting anybody if those closest to and with the biggest honest emotional commitment to a public service are going to say that their vote is second class because they're biased. No, they're not biased. They have the most reason to want St Andrew's Ward to stay open in this case. So that's quite a sinister twist on the way that our public authorities consult us over this mental health issue.
This shouldn't be a party political issue. It is an everyone issue. So
let's suppose the Bath NHS Trust merged with the Somerset NHS Trust. Then the mentally ill people in Bath who are currently at the moment being transferred to Harrogate, so I'm told, and Northumberland, and London, and Cardiff to have mentally ill treatment could come to St Andrew's Ward if there was just one NHS Trust, and if we had a truly NHS national service. One day, we will have a truly NHS national health service, not split up into empires ruled over by bullying overpaid managers. One day we will have NHS mental health services.
So we need St Andrew's Ward to remain where it is, a community-based asset, providing acute care to those who need it, within a caring network of other services, family and friends.
So we need St Andrew's Ward. We need mental health service in every town and large village in Somerset, and if we ever get there, and if we ever get to a national health service that's a really national health service, where every worker is well paid and well thought of, and mentally ill people aren't isolated because you can visit them in your own town, it'll be thanks to you, brave people.
Taking away local mental health provision will endanger young, marginalised and vulnerable people. In light of the pandemic, we need more targeted local mental health provision, not less. We can't wait until it's too late. We have to stop this closure now.
In order for that to happen, though, obviously people need to contact Somerset Clinical Commissioning Group. So you can email them on somccg.enquiries@nhs.net, or write to them at Winford House, Lufton Way, Lufton Yeovil, BA 228HR, or you could ring them up on 01935 384 000 and explain to them why you think that the ward shouldn't close. Particularly people that don't actually live directly near to Wells would be a good idea, because the people nearer to Wells, apparently we are biased. Also, you can write to the paper, you can sign the petition, which is Save St Andrew's Ward, Wells from closure, I think it says, but it's on change.org. So if you put Save St Andrew's Ward, Wells in there, it will come up. And you can sign that. We've got nearly 2,000 signatures on there now.
We want to contact every single elected representative, every councillor at every level, including members of Parliament, all over Somerset, from basically Minehead over to Frome and Bristol down to Yeovil. Why? Because this is a Somerset issue. Because if the authorities get away with closing local public services, local post offices, local job centres, local maternity units, and in this case local mental health wards, then rural life is really going to be depleted even more than it is at the moment. That if we lose the battle, the war will be won. Why? And I'll return where I started. This is a pandemic. Black and ethnic minority people, students, young people, young men in particular, the elderly, are all suffering from massive increases in isolation and stress. The pandemic, the effects of this pandemic will last, in my view, far, far longer than the effects of the Covid pandemic. And therefore, if they do make the mistake of closing St Andrew's Ward this time round, it may not be St Andrew's Ward where it is now, because of course they may well sell it off, as Wells is a highly profitable city in terms of real estate. But there will be a mental health unit in the Mendip area. They will have to re-establish it because of this mental health crisis, and people do need to be treated.